So we don't have a specific list of what would fall under the purview of internal affairs. I mean, it could be a number of things. Certainly, any officer-involved shootings, those were going to definitely be investigated by internal affairs. Certain pursuits involving serious bodily injury or death, internal affairs will investigate those. We investigate even less serious or severe cases as well. We get complaints from the Citizens Police Complaint Office, and all of those complaints that are filed through that office, they go to internal affairs for investigation. So those can be rudeness, they can be any number of things that are accepted by the CPCO. And so those are investigated by internal affairs. So it's very important to differentiate between a criminal investigation and then an investigation that would go into internal affairs. So there are cases that may involve criminal allegations on an employee, and those would originally be investigated by one of the units within the investigations division. And then depending upon what that unit finds, whether there are charges filed, whether they determine that there were criminal allegations, or maybe they didn't rise to the level of a criminal offense, but it might be an administrative policy violation, then those cases can be referred over to internal affairs for investigation. Really, what we're looking at is we're looking for policy violations. Did you violate a general order, a rule and regulation? Things that are internal, not criminal, administrative. When we have an incident that has just occurred, like something that I mentioned earlier, maybe an officer-involved shooting or a pursuit, typically our on-call investigator is going to be notified by dispatch. So they're notified that there's an investigation, there's an incident on the street that requires them to respond and do some investigating. They'll be notified that way. I also mentioned that we'll be notified of complaints through the Citizens Police Complaint Office. We'll be notified by their executive director of a complaint. We can be notified by a district supervisor. We can be notified by a commanding officer. We could be even notified by partners. Patrol officers may have seen something or been involved in something that they didn't think was appropriate. And so they can report that either to a supervisor or they can report that to internal affairs. We get cases in a number of ways that we would investigate. We know that our presence can sometimes be stressful for people. And so the investigator at the scene will probably hang back a little bit, talk to the criminal investigator, take the scene in for himself or herself, so that in the future, within a matter of days, when we do the statement with internal affairs, they have a little bit of more of an understanding. They were at the scene and they saw the things that they needed to see. So yes, the answer is yes. When an employee is involved in an investigation within internal affairs, they're required to give a compelled statement. Because it is compelled, meaning you don't have a choice but to give this statement. It's very limited in its scope and what it can be used for. So I mentioned earlier that we may have a team from the investigations division doing an investigation, and then we'll also have the internal affairs investigators maybe doing a parallel simultaneous investigation. So the way that works is the information that is collected by the criminal investigator, that can be shared with the internal affairs investigator. It does not go the other way, meaning any information that is learned by the internal affairs investigator, especially through one of these compelled statements, that cannot be shared with the criminal investigator. So typically, no, and I would say that it is never released. However, you can never say never, and you can never give a definitive statement like that, because when you do that, you're going to be proved wrong. So I want to be very clear in that these statements are very protected. These compelled statements are, they're protected by the court, they're protected by law. However, there are a few very unique and very rare occurrences where those statements could be shared with a plaintiff's attorney in the instance of a civil case, or with a criminal attorney in the instance of a criminal case, they could be shared. But I want to stress that that is a very, very rare occurrence, and it would likely happen under the direction of the court. Now, if that statement is shared with a plaintiff's attorney or a criminal attorney, or it comes out through the course of a trial where it's directed by the court, yes, those statements could, or portions of those statements could make it to the public. But again, I want to stress that is an extremely rare, extremely nuanced situation, would not happen often, and it would happen under the direction of a court. So the Use of Force Board is a majority citizen board, and what I mean by that is it has 9 members, and 5 of those members are citizens within our community. And they serve a purpose by, they'll come together for a day, number of hours, could be an entire day, and they will hear testimony, they will see exhibits, they will be walked through the process of a critical incident that may have happened that they are being tasked with evaluating. Their role is to provide the chief with a recommendation as to whether that use of force, in their opinion, was in policy, within our policy, or out of our policy. So they make that recommendation to the chief of police, and then the chief takes that recommendation from the Use of Force Board. He takes that in consideration with all of the information that he has, that has been gathered by the team from the Investigations Division, by the investigators in Internal Affairs, and then the findings of the Use of Force Board. And he takes all of that into consideration to make either discipline decisions, employment decisions, whatever step needs to happen next within the investigation. And I know that sounds very broad, but it's part of the investigation. There's an overall investigation into these critical incidents, and that involves all these various entities that I've mentioned. And so the chief takes that into consideration when he's making his final decisions.